The morning my son-in-law told me to get out of my own house, I was wearing my gardening gloves and holding a tray of seedlings I'd just repotted. He didn't raise his voice. That was the part that stayed with me longer than anything else. He was completely calm, standing in the doorway of what used to be my sunroom, and he said, "Gloria, I think it's time we had a conversation about the property arrangement." I set the tray down. My hands were shaking, but I set it down carefully because I didn't want to disturb the roots. That was 3 years ago. I want to tell you what happened, all of it, because I've never told anyone the full story from the beginning. My attorney said I could talk about it now. Everything is settled. Everything is settled. Everything is done. And I know, that other women my age need to hear this. My name is Gloria. I'm 67 years old. I live in a house I bought myself with a back porch that faces east so I get the morning light, and a kitchen that smells like whatever I decide to cook. I have a garden. I have my health. I have my accounts, my name on my deed, my name on everything that belongs to me. I didn't always. For 14 months I had almost nothing. And it happened so gradually that by the time I understood what was being taken from me, I was already in too deep to see the way out clearly. Let me start where it actually started. Not with my son-in-law, with my husband. Raymond passed in the spring of 2019, pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end, which is how that particular disease tends to work. It doesn't give you much time to prepare, emotionally or otherwise. We had been married for 39 years. He was a civil engineer. I was a high school librarian for 26 years before I retired. Between us, we had built something solid. A paid-off house in Knoxville, Tennessee, a healthy retirement portfolio, savings accounts, a little rental property on the east side that Raymond managed himself and that brought in about $1,100 a month. When Raymond died, I became a woman alone with assets. I didn't fully understand at the time what that meant or how visible it would make me to certain people. My daughter Lauren flew in from Phoenix for the funeral. She was 34 at the time. We had always been close. I thought we had always been close. She called every Sunday. She remembered my birthday without prompting. When I picture her as a little girl, I picture her sitting at the kitchen table with her homework spread out, asking me to quiz her on state capitals. She brought her husband Marcus with her. They had been married for 4 years. I had been at their wedding, had danced at their reception, had cried when Lauren walked down the aisle because she looked so much like herself, like the best version of herself, like everything I had hoped for her. Marcus was an account manager for a software company. He was very polished. Good handshake, good eye contact, the kind of man who knew how to talk to people and make them feel attended to. I always liked him. I told Raymond once, in the early years of their marriage, that I thought Lauren had done well for herself. I want to sit with that sentence for a moment, because I was wrong in a way I couldn't have predicted. After the funeral, after the reception, after the last casserole dish was returned and the last sympathy card was read, Lauren sat down with me at the kitchen table. She had a yellow legal pad. She said she wanted to help me figure out next steps. I told her I was 64 years old and I'd been managing my own life since before she was born. She laughed. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She said, "Mom, I know. I worry about you being here alone. In this big house, you know?" It was a big house. 4 bedrooms. Raymond and I had rattled around in it since Lauren left for college. I had thought about downsizing. I had even looked at a few condos, one in the Bearden neighborhood that had a nice courtyard. But I hadn't done anything yet. I was still in that numb first season of grief where you move through your days like you're walking through water. Lauren's proposal was simple at first. She and Marcus were thinking about relocating anyway. Phoenix was expensive, and Marcus had been offered a position with a company headquartered in Nashville, which was only 3 hours away. Why didn't they move to Knoxville instead? They could live with me, at least temporarily, while they found their footing. Lauren could help me with the house. We could keep each other company. I said yes. Of course I said yes. She was my daughter. They arrived in August with a moving truck, 2 dogs, and boxes stacked to the ceiling. Lauren repainted the guest room without asking, but I told myself it was fine, that it was her home too now, that having people in the house would be good for me. The dogs were large and they shed on everything, but I told myself that was fine too. The noise helped with the quiet. The quiet after Raymond was almost unbearable. The first few months were genuinely good. We ate dinner together most nights. Lauren helped me organize Raymond's home office. Marcus fixed a gutter that had been pulling away from the fascia since the previous winter. I felt for the first time since Raymond died that I was not entirely alone in the world. What I didn't see, what I couldn't see, because I was inside it, was that certain things were shifting. Small things. The kind of things you don't notice until you look back and try to trace the outline. Marcus started handling the mail. Not all at once. It began with him picking it up when he happened to be outside, and then it became a habit. And then one day I realized I hadn't seen the mail in 2 weeks. When I mentioned it, he said he'd been organizing it, that there was a new system. He showed me a folder on the kitchen counter. Everything was sorted, bills, correspondence, junk, very tidy. I thanked him. He started coming with me to appointments, doctor's appointments, the accountant, the bank. He would introduce himself as my son-in-law and explain that I liked having family present for important conversations. Nobody questioned it. Why would they? He was well-dressed, well-spoken. He seemed caring. At the bank, he asked questions I wouldn't have thought to ask, about beneficiary designations, about the process for adding a joint account holder, about what was required to establish power of attorney. I remember the banker looking at me once, just a quick glance, as if to check whether I was following the conversation. I nodded like I was. I was thinking about whether I'd remembered to leave water out for the dogs. The rental property was the first concrete thing I lost, though I didn't understand that I'd lost it at the time. Marcus said the East Side property needed significant repairs before we could continue renting it. A new roof, foundation work, updated electrical. He showed me quotes from contractors. I didn't know any of the companies, but the numbers were large enough to look real. He said it made more financial sense to sell the property, pay off any remaining obligations, and put the remainder into a shared account that could be used for the repairs to the Knoxville house, which also apparently needed work. I asked Lauren what she thought. She said she thought Marcus knew more about this kind of thing than either of us. She said it made sense to trust him. I signed the paperwork. The rental property sold for $280,000. I saw the number on the closing statement and felt a small pang. Raymond had bought that property for $60,000 in 1998, had repainted it himself 3 times, had personally fixed a burst pipe in January of 2009 at 2 in the morning. But the money came to me, and I assumed it went where Marcus said it would go. It took me 4 months to understand that it had not. What finally broke through the fog was a phone call from my friend Adele. Adele and I have been friends since our daughters were in middle school together. She has an uncomfortable habit of saying exactly what she's thinking, which I have spent many years both appreciating and dreading. She called me on a Thursday afternoon and asked how I was doing, really doing, and I said fine, and she said, Gloria, I ran into Carol from your church last week and she said you've seemed different when you come in, quieter, not yourself. I told her I was still grieving. It had only been 1.5 years, she said. Is it the kids? Are they treating you okay? I didn't answer right away. And in that pause, something that had been sitting under the surface for months came up where I could almost see it. I said, I think things are fine. She said, you think. That night, after Lauren and Marcus had gone upstairs, I sat at the kitchen table and tried to do something I hadn't done in several months. I tried to review my own finances. I went to the kitchen drawer where I used to keep my account statements. The drawer had been reorganized. The statements weren't there. I looked in the office, in the file cabinet, in the basket on the counter where Marcus kept the sorted mail. I found utility bills, grocery receipts, a folder labeled Home Expenses in Marcus's handwriting. I did not find a single bank statement in my name. I did not sleep that night. The next morning, I drove to my bank alone. I told Lauren I had a dentist appointment. At the branch on Kingston Pike, I sat down with a banker I'd worked with before, a woman named Sandra, and I asked her to pull up all accounts associated with my Social Security number. What Sandra showed me took about 20 minutes to fully explain, and when she was done, I had to ask her to go through it again from the beginning. The savings account had been drawn down significantly. The proceeds from the rental property sale had come in and then been moved out in several large transfers over the course of 3 months. There was still money. I was not broke, but I was looking at roughly 40% of what should have been there. The joint account Marcus had suggested, the one he said was for household expenses, had my name on it. It also had his name on it. And from that account, in the past year, withdrawals had been made that did not correspond to any home repairs I had authorized or any household expenses I was aware of. I asked Sandra if I was understanding correctly. She looked at me steadily and said yes. I sat in that branch for a long time after Sandra finished talking. She brought me a cup of water. I think she could see that I needed a moment. I want to tell you what I felt, sitting in that chair, because I think people assume the main emotion is anger. It isn't. The first thing is grief. Not the same grief as losing Raymond, but grief in the same family. The grief of understanding that something you trusted was not what you thought it was. That the person sitting across from you at dinner every night, the person you had handed a key to, had been systematically lying to you. The anger came later, and when it came, it was very, very useful. I did not go home that afternoon. I called Adele from the parking lot. I told her what Sandra had shown me. Adele, to her credit, did not say, "I told you so." She said, "Okay, what do you need?" I needed an attorney. Adele's nephew was a real estate attorney in Nashville, and he referred me to a woman in Knoxville who handled elder financial abuse cases. Her name was Patricia, not a nickname, not short for anything, just Patricia. And she had an office on Gay Street, and an expression that suggested she had heard every variation of the story and had never once been surprised. I met with Patricia 2 days later. I had spent those 2 days very carefully acting normal. I came home from my dentist appointment. I cooked dinner. I watched television with Lauren on the couch. I said goodnight to Marcus with a steady voice. I had the cats inside me, the clawing, churning knowledge of what I now knew, and I kept them contained. I told Patricia everything. She listened without interrupting. She asked clear, specific questions. What accounts had been joint? What had been solely mine? What had I signed, and when had I ever been presented with any power of attorney documents? I answered everything as accurately as I could. She took notes on a yellow legal pad, which reminded me of Lauren at my kitchen table the week after Raymond's funeral. And I had to look away for a moment. Patricia said I had a case. She said the transfers were documented, that the pattern was clear, that what had happened to the rental property proceeds was going to require a forensic accountant to fully trace, but that the preliminary picture was not ambiguous. She also said something that I want to share with you, because I think it matters. She said, "Mrs. Harmon, the most important thing right now is that you don't give them any reason to believe you know what they've done. Do you understand?" I said I understood. She said, "Can you maintain that for a few more weeks?" I said, "I maintained it for 14 months without knowing I was doing it. I think I can manage a few more weeks." She almost smiled at that. What Patricia needed was documentation, bank statements, transfer records, the closing documents from the rental property sale, anything in writing. The problem was that all of this was being filtered through Marcus. The mail, the statements, the correspondence. I had been, very gradually, removed from the flow of my own financial information, so I had to get it back another way. Sandra at the bank had already helped me set up online access under an email address Marcus didn't know about, accessed only from my phone when I was alone. That gave me access to current account activity. For the historical records, Patricia filed requests directly with the financial institutions, which they were required to provide under Tennessee law. But there was one more thing Patricia suggested, and it's the thing I think about most when I look back on those weeks. She said, "Is there anywhere in the house where you could put a small audio recorder? Somewhere you might have conversations about finances or property?" Tennessee is a one-party consent state, she explained. That meant I could legally record conversations I was part of without the other person's knowledge. I thought about it. I knew exactly where. Raymond's old chair sat in the corner of the living room. It was a large, high-backed armchair, the kind with wide armrests and a pocket on the side for the TV remote. Marcus had tried to move it twice, and I had firmly insisted it stay where it was. He'd rolled his eyes at Lauren, thinking I didn't see. I saw everything. I just hadn't known what to do with what I saw. I placed a small voice-activated recorder inside the armrest pocket. Over the next 3 weeks, while I watered my garden and cooked dinner and watched television and said goodnight, that recorder collected 47 hours of audio from the living room. Most of it was mundane. Television. The dogs. Lauren talking on the phone to a friend. And then, on a Sunday evening, Marcus's brother came to visit. I made them coffee and left the room. I went to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, and I could hear, very faintly, the murmur of conversation from the living room. I did not need to hear it in real time. I had the recorder. When Patricia reviewed that audio with the transcriptionist 3 days later, she called me at 8 in the morning, which she had never done before. She said, "Gloria, I need you to come in this afternoon." What Marcus said to his brother that evening was, in summary, this. The old woman still had roughly $200,000 in a brokerage account they hadn't touched yet. The plan was to get me to sign a document transferring the management of that account to a financial services entity that Marcus had a financial interest in. He had a notary in his contact list who owed him a favor. He and Lauren had also discussed in some detail the possibility of having me assessed by a doctor. Marcus had a specific doctor in mind, to establish that I had cognitive decline significant enough to support a guardianship petition. Once guardianship was established, they would have legal control over all remaining assets. I sat in Patricia's office that afternoon with my hands very still in my lap, and I listened to her play the relevant segments of that audio. And I thought about Lauren sitting across from me at my kitchen table with her yellow legal pad, and I thought about Raymond, about how he would have wanted me to handle this, and about the chair that had been his chair, and that I had refused to move. Patricia filed a civil complaint for financial elder abuse under Tennessee Code Annotated 71-620. She also referred the matter to the district attorney's office, which opened a criminal investigation based on the recorded evidence and the financial transfer records. I will tell you what happened next in plain terms, because that's what it was. Marcus was arrested on a Tuesday morning. 2 detectives came to the house. I was in the garden. I heard the doorbell, and I heard voices, and I kept my hands in the soil until it was quiet again. Marcus was charged with financial exploitation of an elderly person, which is a Class C felony in Tennessee. He was also charged with fraud and with conspiracy, the latter because the recording made clear that Lauren had been aware of and involved in the planning. Lauren was not arrested that morning. She was interviewed by detectives and, about 3 weeks later, was charged as well, also with financial exploitation and conspiracy. She called me from her attorney's phone after she was processed. I answered. She said, "Mom, I need you to understand that I never wanted things to go this far." I said, "Lauren." She said, "I love you. I want you to know that." I said, "I know you believe that." And I hung up. That is the last conversation I have had with my daughter. I am not going to tell you that I feel nothing, because that would be a lie. I feel a great deal, but I want to be careful about what I tell you, because I've noticed that people want me to either be devastated or triumphant. And the truth is that I am something more complicated and quieter than either of those things. I grieve my daughter. I grieve the version of her that I thought existed. I grieve the 39 years of my marriage that ended with Raymond's death and then got complicated by everything that came after. But I do not regret a single decision I made from the afternoon in Sandra's bank branch to the morning the detectives came. The civil case was settled before trial. Through Patricia's work and with the forensic accountant's documentation, we recovered the majority of the transferred funds, including the rental property proceeds. Not every dollar, but enough. Enough to feel like something was restored. The criminal cases were resolved with plea agreements. Marcus pleaded guilty and received 3 years of supervised probation, a substantial fine, and is required to register as a financial elder abuser in the state of Tennessee, which affects his professional licensing. Lauren pleaded to a reduced charge and received probation as well, along with mandatory counseling. I was not in the courtroom for either of those proceedings. I had said everything I needed to say in a victim impact statement that Patricia helped me prepare and that I read into the record. I don't need to watch the sentencing to feel that justice was served. The evidence did that work. Patricia did that work. Sandra at the bank, who looked at me steadily across the table and made sure I understood what I was seeing, did that work. I came home that day, and I sat in Raymond's chair. The recorder was long gone. It had been entered into evidence and returned to me afterward, and I had put it in a drawer. But I sat in that chair and I looked at the room and I thought about the roots of things, about how long it takes for something to become rooted, and how devastating it is when it gets pulled up, and how stubborn roots can be, how they persist even when everything above the surface has been damaged. My seedlings are doing well, by the way. The ones I was holding the morning Marcus told me we needed to have a conversation about the property arrangement. They're in the ground now. Tomatoes mostly, and some herbs along the south-facing border where the light is best. Raymond would have appreciated the placement. I want to leave you with something practical, because I think you deserve more than just a story. I think you deserve something you can use. If someone in your life, a child, a spouse, anyone, begins to position themselves between you and your own financial information, pay attention to that. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It can be as quiet as picking up the mail, as reasonable sounding as, "I'll handle the paperwork." Pay attention anyway. If you're over 60 and you have assets, talk to an elder law attorney before you need one. Not when things have gone wrong, but now, while they're fine. Know what's in your accounts. Know what documents have your name on them. Know who has access to what. I cannot tell you how much I wish I had done this before Raymond died rather than after. And if something feels wrong, if you have that low, persistent feeling that something in your life has shifted in a way you can't quite name, trust that feeling. You have 60, 70 years of instinct behind that feeling. It knows things before you do. The morning light is coming in through the east-facing porch now. I'm going to go water my garden. Everything here is mine, and I know exactly where it all is, and I am not moving. I've been thinking lately about how long things can go wrong before you realize they've been going wrong. 14 months. That's how long I lived inside a situation I didn't fully understand. And I want to be honest about that because I think people expect the person telling this kind of story to have been sharper, faster, more alert. They want you to have caught it at month 2. They want you to have trusted your gut from the beginning. But grief does something to your instincts. When you lose a person you've built your entire adult life around, your radar goes quiet for a while. You stop looking for the wrong thing because you're too busy just trying to get through the day. What I understand now, on the other side of all of it, is that Marcus counted on exactly that. He read the situation correctly. A widow in her 60s, assets in place, judgment temporarily softened by loss, and he planned accordingly. That is a cold thing to acknowledge. But I think acknowledging it clearly is more useful than pretending it couldn't have happened to a careful person, because it can. It did. What changed everything wasn't luck. It was Adele calling me on a Thursday afternoon and asking how I was doing. Really doing. One friend asking one honest question. That was the thread I pulled. And I want to sit with that for a moment, because I think we underestimate what it means to actually ask someone how they are, and then wait for the real answer. Once I pulled the thread, I didn't stop. I went to Sandra at the bank. I called Patricia. I placed that recorder in Raymond's chair and I waited. None of those decisions felt brave at the time. They felt like the only logical next step, one after another. That's what I've come to believe about what people call courage. It's usually just clarity about what has to happen next, followed by the willingness to do it anyway. Marcus and Lauren made their choices freely. They chose to look at a grieving woman and see an opportunity. They chose to do it carefully, patiently, over 14 months. And those choices led them exactly where choices like that tend to lead, to detectives at the front door, to plea agreements, to a record that will follow them. I did not arrange that outcome. I simply documented the truth and handed it to people whose job it was to act on it. The outcome followed from their own actions, not from anything I did to them. What I did do was refuse to stay confused. That's the part I feel most settled about. I refused to let the fog stay permanent. When Adele's question cracked it open, I walked through that crack as deliberately as I could, and I didn't look away from what I found on the other side. I think about what Raymond would say. He was a practical man. He would probably say I should have had better systems in place from the start, which is fair. He would also say that I handled it right once I knew, which I believe is also fair. The chair is still in the corner of the living room. I sit in it in the evening sometimes, when the light is going. It's just a chair now. It belongs to the room the way all the other things belong to the room. Mine, known, accounted for. That's enough. Some mornings that's everything.